I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't just hand out large sums of money to anyone who walks in off the street, the branch manager, Susan Carmichael, said in a tone coated with arrogance. Her manicured hand slid the withdrawal slip back across the marble counter, her expression barely concealing the smirk beneath. Especially not for amounts like this. Her voice echoed through the high-ceilinged lobby of Wellington Trust's Chicago headquarters, a pristine downtown location where everything from the polished brass light fixtures to the marble floor screamed wealth and exclusivity. A small circle of employees gathered near the glass-walled offices turned their heads at Susan's comment. Some were whispering, others openly staring. One younger teller leaned close to her coworker and said, just loudly enough to be overheard, "No way she has that kind of money. Look at her." A ripple of laughter followed. Muted, but undeniable. The woman standing on the receiving end of this spectacle, Danielle Monroe, remained composed. Her spine straight. Her lips in a firm line. The bank staff saw an ordinary black woman in modest clothes, jeans, a plain sweater, a functional leather bag. They saw what they wanted to see. But what they didn't realize what they were about to find out was that this wasn't just another customer. Danielle wasn't just anyone. She was the chief executive officer of the entire Wellington Trust Corporation. And they had just mocked her in front of a lobby full of customers and cameras. But Danielle didn't flinch. Not even as the humiliation thickened around her like smoke. Because she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about the culture she had suspected, the kind of quiet systemic rot that polished mission statements often failed to conceal. She had come here for a reason and now, she had everything she needed to prove her case. Danielle stood motionless at the counter, looking directly at Susan, who still had a practiced look of managerial control on her face, chin raised, hand on hip, as though preparing to scold a schoolchild. Around them, customers continued pretending not to stare. A man in a business suit checked his phone, but his eyes darted up every few seconds. A middle-aged woman clutched her purse tighter as if Danielle had threatened her. No one saw power. They only saw color. Behind Danielle, the Wellington Trust mission statement glowed in golden letters on the marble wall. Integrity. Inclusion. Innovation. It felt like a joke now. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew your name? Before they knew what you were capable of? Before they saw what you had built with your own hands? Danielle had. So many times before. 25 years earlier, she had stood behind a very different counter. In a faded uniform. With a name tag that said, Danielle, teller trainee. She had scrubbed ink off her fingers every night. She'd missed family events to balance drawers, to stay late learning systems, to impress supervisors who never quite saw her potential. She was the first to arrive, the last to leave. The invisible workhorse. The quiet, relentless one. Now she was the one with the power. But today was about exposing the lie. She had come here undercover, dressed plainly, without an assistant, without a driver, without her title. Just another customer, walking into her own institution. She'd been sitting in the waiting area for over 35 minutes before she approached the counter. In that time, she had seen white men in suits escorted straight to private offices. She had seen a young white woman greeted with warmth, joked with, and served in under 2 minutes. She'd watched an elderly black man in a U.S. Postal Service uniform be questioned 3 times about his ID. And now, she stood facing the full weight of the bias herself. Danielle slid her bank card and ID back across the counter. "I'd like to withdraw $115,000, she said clearly. Susan blinked. Then she laughed, as though Danielle had made a joke. "That's a significant amount," she said. "What exactly do you need that kind of cash for?" Danielle raised an eyebrow. "That's personal." Susan's lips tightened. "For amounts over $10,000, we require special clearance. And for anything over $100,000, we typically speak to the client's relationship manager first." Danielle didn't blink. "I've been with this bank for 23 years. I've withdrawn more than that before. Susan's eyes flicked to the ID again. She looked back up and down at Danielle, as if trying to match the name on the card to the woman in front of her. A subtle tilt of her head conveyed disbelief, if not outright disdain. A man in a gray vest, Trevor, the assistant manager, approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked loudly. "Not yet," Danielle replied calmly. "But I'm beginning to wonder." Trevor didn't answer her. He glanced down at the withdrawal amount and then to Susan, silently asking what she wanted him to do. Susan gave a tiny nod. "I'll need to speak with security," Trevor said, turning away. Danielle's stomach didn't drop. Her chest didn't burn. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't unique. It was America. It was banking while black. Across the lobby, a security guard rose from his post. Danielle could see a mother whispering to her two children as they both looked at her, confused. Perhaps they were being taught, unconsciously, who looked like they belonged and who didn't. Danielle took one deep breath. And then she reached into her bag. Not for a weapon. But for her phone. One call. One name. That was all it would take. The reckoning had already begun. Long before Danielle Monroe stood in the marble lobby of Wellington Trust's headquarters being questioned for daring to withdraw her own money, she had stood behind a teller counter on the south side of Chicago, dressed in a cheap polyester uniform and second-hand flats. It was 1998, and she was just 22, fresh out of community college, her resume paper-thin but her ambitions endless. The bank had just expanded its services to underserved neighborhoods, and Danielle had applied after seeing a handwritten, "Now hiring," sign taped to the branch window on 71st and Cottage Grove. Her name tag had read, "Danielle M., Teller Trainee." Those early months were tough. Her shifts were long, her breaks short, and the smile on her face had to remain fixed no matter how condescending the customers or how exhausted she felt. She'd take the red line home after closing, feet aching and back sore, and spend her evenings reading through financial manuals and loan documents like they were novels. She wasn't just learning procedures, she was learning the game. Danielle didn't come from money. Her mother, a retired school secretary, had raised her and two brothers on her own. Her father had left when she was 7. There were no family businesses, no trust funds, no connections in finance. But what Danielle lacked in access, she made up for in sheer willpower. Her managers noticed. Within 2 years, she was promoted to loan officer, outperforming every other rookie in her district. Danielle had a gift for numbers, but more importantly, she had empathy. She didn't see applications, she saw people. She listened. She advised. She helped first-time homeowners qualify when others would have rejected them on sight. By 2003, she was running her own branch. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. Danielle's branch was one of the few that maintained growth and avoided foreclosure scandals. While others scrambled to cut costs and shut down branches, Danielle made sure her team doubled down on community education. She personally held Saturday morning financial literacy sessions, sometimes for just 3 or 4 attendees. But she knew every ripple mattered. Her approach didn't go unnoticed. Wellington Trust's regional vice president, an older white man named David Linwood, invited her to an executive leadership retreat in Lake Geneva. She was the only black woman in a room full of suits. But when they ran a simulated crisis management drill, Danielle's team won by a mile. Afterward, Linwood pulled her aside and said, "Danielle, if this company had 5 more like you, we'd be the best bank in America." In 2011, Danielle earned a scholarship to the Harvard Business School MBA program, sponsored by the company. She graduated in the top 10% of her class. When she returned, she didn't go back to her old branch. She was appointed Senior Regional Director, overseeing 62 locations across Illinois and Indiana. In her first year, she turned around 3 underperforming districts, implemented a mentorship program that doubled internal promotion rates among women of color, and spearheaded a tech pilot that would later become Wellington's standard operating platform. Her reputation? The fixer. Not the loudest in the boardroom, but the one everyone trusted when things went wrong. In 2016, she became Chief Operating Officer, the first black woman in Wellington's C-suite in its 118-year history. But as far as the board was concerned, she had gone far enough. When the CEO, Howard Remington, announced his retirement in early 2023, the succession conversation began. On paper, Danielle was the obvious choice: 2 decades of service, crisis management accolades, internal loyalty, and an impeccable record of growth. Customers loved her. Employees followed her. Competitors tried to poach her. And yet, whispers in closed rooms told another story. "I just don't know if our clients will relate to her," said one board member in a strategy meeting. "Maybe she's not polished enough for the brand image we want moving forward," another offered. But everyone knew what they meant. Too black. Too plain. Too real. After a contentious vote 5 in favor, 4 against, Danielle Monroe was named CEO of Wellington Trust. She stood behind the podium that day at the company's investor summit, not with tears in her eyes, but with steel in her voice. "I accept this role not just to lead this institution forward, but to ensure that every client, every employee, and every community we serve receives dignity, opportunity, and respect. That is the standard we will hold ourselves to. No exceptions." Behind her, several board members clapped only politely. Others stared off into the crowd. One even checked his watch. Danielle knew what she was up against. But she also knew how to win battles the right way, not by yelling, not by playing victim, but by watching, documenting, and dismantling broken systems from the inside out. Weeks into her new position, she began reviewing performance reports, satisfaction surveys, and complaints across the organization. What she found was disturbing. On the surface, Wellington Trust looked like a success story: strong profits, growing deposits, high retention. But beneath that shiny exterior, a different story lived in the margins. Customers of color were 3 times more likely to close accounts within a year. Branches in affluent white areas had 20% higher satisfaction scores even when the services were identical. Complaints filed by minority clients were less likely to be investigated or escalated. One branch stood out for its contradictions: the Chicago flagship on LaSalle Street. Its metrics were exceptional: new accounts up, loan origination strong, minimal complaints. But exit interviews and off-the-record feedback told a different story. Subtle hostility. Cold treatment. Customers who left and never explained why. Danielle knew exactly what was happening. And she knew what she had to do. She wouldn't issue a memo. She wouldn't send a consultant. She would go there herself. In jeans and sneakers. With a fake name. And a withdrawal slip. Because sometimes, the only way to expose a culture of quiet bias, is to walk straight into it. The morning Danielle Monroe walked through the glass doors of Wellington Trust's LaSalle Street branch, the city was just starting to buzz. Taxis honked at slow-moving rideshares, morning joggers passed in front of the iconic Willis Tower, and a warm breeze rolled off Lake Michigan. But inside the bank's flagship branch, the atmosphere was noticeably colder. Danielle had chosen her outfit with precision: nothing flashy, but not shabby either. A black leather jacket, dark denim jeans, and clean white sneakers. Her natural curls were pulled into a neat bun, her face free of makeup, and she carried a leather satchel that had seen better days. It was the look of a woman with a modest savings account, maybe a school teacher or admin assistant, certainly not the CEO of a national financial institution. She slipped past the rotating doors at exactly 9:15 a.m., just after opening. A few customers were already waiting inside, seated on leather benches beneath a large oil painting of the bank's founder Carter Wellington, a man whose icy gaze seemed to follow her as she moved. Danielle took a seat near the window, pulled out her phone, and pretended to scroll while actually watching everything. In the next 15 minutes, the curtain began to lift. First came a white businessman in a sharp charcoal suit. He barely got through the entrance before a smiling staff member appeared at his side. "Good morning, Mr. Halberstam. How can we help you today? He was escorted straight to a private desk, bypassing both the queue and the waiting area entirely. Then an elderly Asian couple entered. The welcome was far less warm. No greeting. No smile. Just a stiff finger pointing them toward the numbered ticket dispenser. Next was a young white woman in yoga pants and a Patagonia vest. She breezed up to the counter and was met with light-hearted banter from the teller. How was your weekend? That brunch place on Wacker you mentioned, did you go? She was in and out in under 2 minutes. Then came a Hispanic man in custodial coveralls. He approached the same counter. The mood shifted immediately. The teller Danielle noted her name tag. Beth stiffened. Her tone flattened. She asked for 2 forms of ID, then cross-checked his signature. When he asked a simple question about his balance, she responded with vague statements and tapped the keyboard with unnecessary force. His check took nearly 10 minutes to cash. Danielle exhaled slowly. This was what she needed to see. Not just numbers. Not just graphs. But human evidence. Patterns. Disparities. Bias masquerading as protocol. By the time she stood up to approach the counter herself, she had counted 6 more incidents of similarly uneven treatment. 3 white customers who had entered after her were already served and gone. And it wasn't even 10 a.m. Danielle stepped to the counter. Teller Beth looked up, her eyes flicking to Danielle's hoodie and bare face. The smile she had offered to the yoga-clad woman earlier was gone. How can I help you? Beth asked, her voice professional but colder than the thermostat-controlled air. I'd like to make a withdrawal, Danielle said, sliding her bank card, ID, and a withdrawal slip across the glass. Beth glanced down. Her eyes lingered on the number. $115,000. There was a pause. Beth blinked, then looked back up at Danielle, then at the ID again, and then back at Danielle. As if trying to verify this was real. This is a large amount, she said, her voice rising slightly. It's within the daily limit for my account type, Danielle responded evenly. Beth didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the next counter and whispered to Mark, the senior teller, a tall man in his early 40s with slick back hair and a badge that read, 15 years of excellence. Mark looked over, nodded once, and approached with purposeful strides. He stood directly behind Beth, towering over the counter like a bouncer outside a nightclub. Is there a problem here? He asked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The eyes of nearby customers began to turn toward them. Conversations quieted. One woman clutched her handbag tighter. Danielle remained composed. She placed both hands on the counter and said calmly, no problem at all. I'm simply making a withdrawal from my account. Mark didn't move. He reached over, picked up Danielle's ID, and studied it for a few seconds too long. We've been seeing some unusual activity with these types of accounts, he said, stressing, these types, like it had barbed edges. Danielle's eyes narrowed just a touch. What types would those be, exactly? He ignored her question. Beth, can you pull up the transaction history? Beth tapped at the keyboard, slower than before. Another employee drifted over. His name tag read Richard, and his gelled hair and smug expression gave off the energy of someone who had seen one too many crime shows. He leaned in close to Mark and muttered something, clearly not quiet enough. Could be money laundering, Danielle heard him say. Or check fraud. You know the type. Then he looked at Danielle, eyes scanning her modest outfit and natural hair, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. We just want to verify the funds are actually yours, Richard said with false sweetness. You understand. It's for your protection. The line was so practiced it felt rehearsed. Danielle didn't flinch. She had dealt with this before. Not from staff, from executives. But the playbook never changed. I've provided my identification, she said. I've presented my bank card. I've been a customer here for years. I'd like to complete my transaction. That's when Richard signaled. Jessica, he called out, loud enough to draw attention. From behind the frosted glass office doors, Susan Carmichael, the branch manager, stepped out. Her heels clicked sharply across the floor. Her posture was confident. Her gaze was condescending before she had even reached the counter. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Danielle with a tight smile. "I understand there's a bit of confusion regarding your withdrawal request." "There's no confusion on my part," Danielle said coolly. "I'm simply trying to access my own money." Susan didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask for Danielle's name. She didn't treat her like a client. She treated her like a problem. Susan Carmichael, the branch manager of Wellington Trust's downtown flagship, folded her arms across her chest and took a shallow breath, the kind reserved for annoyance masquerading as professionalism. $115,000 is a substantial amount of cash, she said, her voice low but audible to nearby customers. "May I ask what it's for?" Danielle Monroe didn't flinch. Her voice was even, her gaze unwavering. "That's a personal matter. And I believe your own policy states you don't ask that question unless a suspicious activity alert has already been flagged." Susan blinked, caught, but not rattled. She recovered quickly with a faux smile that never reached her eyes. "We just want to ensure everything is in compliance." "Then comply," Danielle said plainly. "I've already presented the required ID, the bank card, and the withdrawal slip." Behind the counter, Beth, the teller who had initially helped Danielle, looked visibly uneasy. Her eyes darted from her computer screen to Susan and back again, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered above the keyboard. She wasn't sure what protocol to follow anymore. Danielle could feel the eyes of every person in the bank settling on her. An older white man 2 stations over had paused his transaction and was now watching the exchange with unconcealed interest. A young mother held her children's hands a little tighter. A man in a delivery uniform narrowed his eyes. The message was clear. A black woman, withdrawing 6 figures. Something must be wrong. Richard, the teller who had whispered "money laundering" earlier, leaned against the counter now, clearly emboldened by Susan's presence. His tone was syrupy, mocking. "Did you, maybe come into some money recently? A settlement perhaps? Or, inheritance?" Danielle raised a brow slightly. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Oh, not suggesting anything, ma'am," Richard replied, spreading his hands like a game show host. "Just trying to be thorough. You know how it is." Mark, the senior teller, nodded solemnly, as if confirming a universal truth. "There's been a lot of check fraud lately. Especially in this part of the city." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "This part of the city?" No answer. The air was thick now, no longer with mere discomfort, but something more pungent: accusation. Suspicion. Prejudice. Susan leaned forward slightly. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable visiting one of our alternative service centers. There's a check cashing location 2 blocks down on Madison Avenue. They handle informal requests more regularly." Danielle felt a sharp sting behind her ribs. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. The final mask had slipped. This wasn't about policy. This was about who they thought she was. And more importantly, who they thought she could never be. Danielle reached into her bag slowly. Not for a second did she raise her voice. She pulled out her phone and stepped slightly to the left, still in view of the counter. "Excuse me," she said, dialing calmly, "I need to make a quick call." Beth glanced up and then back down again, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her keyboard. Her body language screamed discomfort. Richard, on the other hand, nudged Mark and did a mocking impression, chin up, fake phone to ear. "Yes, hello, I'm an important person," he said under his breath, pretending to mimic Danielle's poised posture. Danielle ignored it. The phone rang once. Then twice. Then, yes, this is Danielle Monroe. I'm at the LaSalle branch. They're refusing to process a verified transaction. On the other side of the call, in a high-rise office a few blocks away, Marcia Vaughn, the bank's executive vice president of operations, froze at the sound of Danielle's voice. In the branch, Richard stiffened slightly but tried to laugh it off. "Oh no, she's calling corporate," he muttered sarcastically to Mark. Danielle remained poised. "Yes, that's correct. No, they haven't cited a formal reason. They simply refuse to believe the funds are mine." She paused. "I'd like someone here immediately. Preferably you." Susan's face had begun to pale slightly. She still didn't recognize Danielle. But something in her spine shifted, like a deep animal instinct kicking in. The calm in Danielle's voice, the confidence it didn't match the narrative she'd been building. Still, pride overpowered reason. "Ma'am," Susan snapped, "if you're going to cause a disruption, we will have to involve security." Danielle didn't even look at her. She ended the call. Slipped the phone back into her purse. And said, simply, "You're welcome to try." Susan turned toward Trevor, the junior security officer standing awkwardly near the front door. "Escort her out," she said firmly. Trevor hesitated. Danielle turned to him and spoke softly. "I've broken no law. I'm not disruptive. I'm a verified account holder, requesting a standard withdrawal. Please be very sure, sir, before you place your hands on me." Trevor glanced between the two women, the authority in Susan's voice battling the moral clarity in Danielle's. He didn't move. Silence stretched across the lobby like a rubber band nearing its breaking point. Customers were watching openly now. One older black gentleman shook his head slowly, as if he'd seen this play out one too many times. A young woman clutched her handbag to her chest. A suited man in line checked his watch but stayed put, captivated. Danielle placed her hands gently on the counter. "I would like to speak to someone with actual authority," she said. "Because it's clear no one here has any idea who I am or what this will cost them." Susan smirked. "And who exactly do you think you are?" Danielle didn't answer. She didn't need to. Not yet. Because the reckoning had already begun. Danielle Monroe stood like an immovable pillar of calm in the center of the storm. Her voice never rose. Her posture never faltered. Yet her very presence confident, unapologetic, and black was treated like a disruption. Behind the counter, Susan Carmichael tried to maintain her control. Her authority. But the cracks had begun to show. Danielle's last words still echoed in her ears. "You have no idea who I am or what this will cost you." Susan scoffed, but her smile faltered. "We deal with people like you all the time," she muttered. "Always trying to bluff your way into." The doors to the branch remained closed, but the clock on the wall ticked with ominous precision. 10:17 a.m. A time that would later appear on legal reports, security logs, and boardroom briefings. Danielle's phone call calm, concise, and lethal was making its way up the chain of command at Wellington Trust faster than any of them could imagine. 3 blocks away, inside a secured floor of Wellington's corporate tower, Marcia Vaughn, executive vice president of operations, had stood up so fast her office chair had rolled backward into the window. She didn't even notice. She knew that voice. Everyone at the executive level did. Because Danielle Monroe wasn't just the CEO. She was the woman who had cleaned up 3 failing divisions. The woman who'd once tripled minority lending in under a year. The woman who, just 3 months ago, had been sworn in as the first black female CEO in the bank's century-long history. Marcia barked orders without hesitation. "Get me every client complaint from the LaSalle branch in the last year. Pull the security feeds. I want every camera angle from the last 2 hours. Now." Her assistant scrambled. Within seconds, the executive suite transformed into a war room. In the boardroom down the hall, Jonathan Avery, chairman of the board, was mid-sentence when the double doors swung open and a technician rushed in. "Sir, you need to see this," the tech said, slightly out of breath. Avery raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? It's the downtown branch. We're patching in live feeds now." Within moments, the entire boardroom screen lit up with real-time footage from inside the branch. Danielle was visible on every angle. Stoic. Composed. Isolated at the center of attention like a queen amid a court of fools. Silence fell across the room. "That's Danielle Monroe," whispered one board member, as if the name alone held weight. "Yes," Avery said grimly. "Our CEO. And she's being treated like a criminal." In the video, Richard's face appeared as he whispered again to Mark. "This one's definitely laundering," he sneered. Avery clenched his jaw. "Record everything. Every second. And get legal in here." Back at the LaSalle branch, tension thickened like humidity before a summer storm. Danielle, still near the counter, remained quiet. But her silence said everything. Trevor, the junior security officer, stood awkwardly by the customer service desk. His hands twitching. He had never dealt with anything like this. He looked to Susan for guidance. "Escort her out now," Susan ordered again, her voice rising in pitch. Trevor didn't move. "She's making a scene," Susan continued, now addressing the entire room. "We have policies. We have a standard to uphold. This isn't." The glass doors burst open. The entire bank seemed to flinch. In stepped Marcia Vaughn in a tailored navy pantsuit, ID badge swinging from her neck, fire in her eyes. Her heels struck the tile like gunshots. "Stop," she said, voice cutting through the room like a blade. Every employee froze. Susan turned. Her eyes widened. "Ms. Vaughn," she stammered. Marcia didn't respond. Instead, she strode directly to Danielle and addressed her with quiet reverence. "Ms. Monroe," she said, her voice softening with something that sounded like shame. "I'm so sorry." Danielle gave a single nod. Not in forgiveness but in acknowledgement. The branch fell into stunned silence. Marcia turned to face the staff, her voice resuming its razor's edge. "This," she said, sweeping her hand toward the scene, "is the CEO of Wellington Trust. The woman you've been mocking, delaying, interrogating and discriminating against." The shock was immediate and catastrophic. Richard stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. His face went pale. Mark suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. Beth the teller looked like she might vomit. Susan went still. The color drained from her face in a way that made her suddenly look 10 years older. "You're mistaken," Susan said, almost whispering. She didn't say who she was. She didn't have to," Marcia shot back. "Because it shouldn't matter." Customers in the lobby began pulling out their phones. Not to make calls but to document what was happening. The entire story was unfolding live, raw, and without rehearsal. Danielle turned to Trevor. "You can lower your hand, officer. No need to escort me anywhere." Trevor dropped his arm instantly. Beth started crying silently, tears falling onto the laminate desk. Marcia stepped forward, her voice loud enough to fill the room. "Every interaction in this building has been recorded. From the moment Ms. Monroe walked in until right now. And I can assure you every executive in this company is watching." Susan looked like she was going to faint. Danielle finally spoke. Her voice wasn't angry. It was resolute. "Is this how you treat all your customers?" she asked. "Or just the ones who look like me?" Silence. Marcia nodded slowly, and for the first time, so did Jonathan Avery, his face now visible on a live video feed from the boardroom. "Susan Carmichael," he said into the mic, "you are relieved of duty, effective immediately." Susan gasped. Richard stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a customer brochure stand. Mark tried to object but only managed a squeak. Danielle stepped forward. "This isn't personal," she said, her voice clear, "but it is necessary." She turned to the remaining customers, to the staff, to the stunned faces in the room. "It stops today." The name dropped like a gavel. Danielle Monroe, Jonathan Avery repeated again, his voice coming through the speakerphone in the center of the Wellington Trust flagship branch. Chief Executive Officer. Appointed unanimously by the board 3 months ago. And the person you tried to humiliate on camera in your own lobby. The silence was nuclear. A security camera in the upper corner of the lobby zoomed slightly, adjusting its focus as if even the technology understood that history was being written in real time. Susan Carmichael stumbled backward as if the words physically hit her. Her hands trembled slightly as she attempted to speak, but all that came out was a brittle gasp. Richard leaned heavily against the teller counter, his smirk gone, replaced by a sheen of sweat. Mark shifted his weight uneasily, suddenly very aware that dozens of eyes were on him. And Beth Young, tearful Beth, just shook her head slowly, her body frozen behind her station, guilt sinking into her bones. Customers stopped pretending not to watch. Many of them stood. Some recorded. Some whispered to their children. An elderly black woman in the corner nodded to herself, as if affirming a truth long known. Danielle Monroe stood in the eye of it all, calm, unshaken, her presence louder than any words she could have spoken. In the executive surveillance suite 5 blocks away, monitors displayed the full scope of the disaster. Split screens showed not only Danielle's interaction but also 6 other customers from that morning, the elderly Asian couple being waved off with no greeting, the Hispanic janitor being grilled over a $200 check, the black mother waiting 40 minutes while her white counterpart was ushered in after 3. The pattern was clear. Systemic. Undeniable. And captured in full high-definition video. "Marcia," Danielle said, turning to her EVP, "I need a full report prepared for legal, compliance, and the Department of Financial Institutions. Every interaction from this morning. Full audit. Full review. We go public with the findings." Marcia Vaughn didn't blink. "Already in motion, ma'am." Susan Carmichael took a step forward now, her voice trembling but defiant. "This is all a misunderstanding. You didn't identify yourself. How were we supposed to know?" "You weren't," Danielle replied coolly. "Because it shouldn't matter. Your job wasn't to evaluate my clothes or my skin. It was to serve the client standing in front of you." Susan opened her mouth to respond again, but Danielle cut her off. "I watched you greet a man in a $3,000 suit with smiles and champagne service. I saw how you treated the janitor. The grandmother. Me. Your pattern isn't new, it's just finally been caught." Behind Susan, Mark tried to melt into the background, but Danielle wasn't finished. "You looked at me and made a decision in 5 seconds flat, not a client. Not worthy. Not your kind of person." Her gaze moved to Richard, who looked like he wanted to disappear through the tile floor. "And you found it funny," she added. "You found me funny." Richard looked down, jaw clenched tight, tears beginning to well. Jonathan Avery's voice returned through the speaker. "Effective immediately, Susan Carmichael, Mark Adler, and Richard Gaines are terminated from Wellington Trust. You will be escorted from the premises by security." Trevor, the junior security officer, looked startled. He glanced at Danielle. She gave a subtle nod. Trevor straightened his shoulders and approached the trio with quiet firmness. "You'll need to gather your personal items. I'll walk you to the back." Mark's jaw dropped. Wait a second, this is insane. We didn't do anything illegal." "No," Danielle said, her voice like polished steel. "Just immoral. And institutionally destructive." Richard didn't protest. He simply wept quietly as he walked away, shoulders slumped. Susan paused one last time, looking back at Danielle. "You've just made a big mistake," she muttered. Danielle smiled faintly. "I'm very good at correcting them." As the 3 former employees were let out, a weighted silence remained in their wake. But beneath it, something new stirred. Something long overdue. A beginning. Danielle turned toward Beth. The young woman stood like a statue, cheeks streaked with tears, eyes glassy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't know how to stop it. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to speak up." And then Danielle stepped closer. "You didn't join them," she said gently. "That matters." Beth's lower lip trembled. "Am I fired too?" Danielle shook her head. "No. But you will be retrained, mentored, and held to a higher standard than you ever have before. Because if you stay, you're going to help rebuild this branch." Beth nodded quickly, tears falling faster now. "Yes. Yes, I will." Danielle turned to the remaining staff. "This isn't about a few bad apples. It's about the system that let them thrive." She raised her voice now, speaking not just to them but to the bank's cameras. The board. The media that would soon catch wind of this. From this moment forward, Wellington Trust will operate with full transparency, full accountability, and full equity. Not just on paper. In every interaction. With every client. The words echoed through the marble lobby. Then, with her final move, Danielle walked back to the counter and did what she had come to do. She placed her hand on the counter. And said, "Now. I'd like to withdraw $115,000 from my account, please." Beth stepped forward, cleared her throat, and began processing the transaction. This time, no one interrupted. This time, no one doubted she belonged. The next hour at Wellington Trust's LaSalle Street branch unfolded in a strange quiet. The type of silence that follows a storm thick with aftershocks, yet expectant of change. Danielle Monroe remained at the center of it all. But now, the dynamic had shifted entirely. No longer treated as an outsider or a suspicious client, she was recognized for what she was, the highest authority in the building. The woman who could and would rewrite the rules. Behind her, the once smirking staff had been escorted out, their footsteps echoing behind Trevor, the security guard, who now carried himself with a new awareness of the weight of silence and of choice. The power of complicity, the price of speaking up. Danielle took a slow breath and faced the remaining employees, those who hadn't jeered or mocked, but hadn't intervened either. "I want you all to gather here," she said, her voice calm but charged. One by one, the tellers and assistants moved out from behind the counters. A few looked ashamed. Others just confused. But all obeyed. Beth stood slightly apart, wringing her hands. Danielle looked them over not with hostility, but with leadership. The kind of authority that doesn't need volume to command respect. "What happened here today," she began, "is not just about 3 people making bad decisions. It's about a culture that allowed them to believe those decisions were acceptable." No one spoke. She continued, "For too long, performance metrics have focused only on numbers: accounts opened, transactions processed, loans closed. But we forgot the most important number: how many people we harmed or excluded to get there." Her words hung heavy in the marble air. Beth's lip quivered. Danielle stepped closer to her. "Beth," she said gently, "you didn't mock me. You didn't insult me. But you also didn't stop it. And that hesitation is something we're going to work through." Beth swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. But you showed discomfort," Danielle added. "And you're still here. That tells me there's something worth investing in." The words hit Beth like a wave. Tears returned to her eyes, but this time with relief, not just shame. Danielle turned to the others. "This branch needs a reset. Not in 6 months. Not after some consultant writes a report. Right now." She pulled out her phone and dialed one number. Ms. Vaughn, she said, speaking to Marcia back in the executive suite, initiate emergency transition protocol for LaSalle. Revoke access credentials for terminated staff. Secure client files. Effective immediately. Yes, ma'am, Marcia replied without hesitation. Danielle ended the call and turned back to the team. We're appointing interim leadership until we complete a full regional audit, she said. The employees looked around waiting to see who would be named. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Danielle looked directly at Beth. You'll serve as interim branch manager. Beth blinked. What? You heard me, Danielle said. You've seen how things go wrong. You know what they feel like. That makes you qualified to build something better. Beth looked like she was about to protest, but I'm just a junior teller, but Danielle stopped her with a raised hand. Don't tell me what you're not. Tell me what you're willing to become. Beth took a shaky breath. I'm willing. Danielle nodded. That's all I needed to hear. Gasps murmured from a few of the staff. One man who had remained entirely silent through the earlier humiliation looked down at the floor, shame burning in his ears. Danielle's phone buzzed again. It was Marcia. We've completed the analytics review, she reported. Data confirms LaSalle had the highest account closure rate among minority customers citywide. The lowest approval rating from walk-in clients. And more than a dozen informal complaints ignored by previous management. Danielle closed her eyes. Then opened them. Thank you. Prepare to brief the board this afternoon. She slipped the phone back into her coat. Then turned back to the branch team. I want every staff member retrained. Equity will not be a checkbox, it will be a daily measurement. Someone in the back, an older man with silver hair and a weary face, raised a hand. Ms. Monroe, are we being punished? No, she said. You're being challenged. To unlearn. To re-examine. To take accountability. If you're willing to do that, there's a place for you at this company. And if we're not, the man asked. Danielle didn't hesitate. Then you're free to leave. Nobody moved. A quiet, humbled understanding passed between them. Danielle looked to Beth. You start this afternoon. There will be support from headquarters, but this branch's culture is now in your hands. What happened here will not define you, but how you fix it will. Beth nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I won't let you down. Danielle gave a faint smile. Don't do it for me. Do it for the next customer who walks in here looking like I did this morning. As Danielle stepped out of the circle, the staff instinctively parted, forming an aisle like a path being cleared. She returned to the front desk and took her original withdrawal receipt. Beth, her hand now steady, processed it without a word. Danielle took the envelope. Slipped it into her bag. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just justice in motion. And with that, she walked out of the branch she now fully owned, not just in title, but in truth. Behind her, a sign on the wall still read, Wellington Trust, Integrity. Inclusion. Innovation. And for the first time in years, it actually meant something. 3 days after Danielle Monroe walked out of the LaSalle Street branch, the story broke. Not as a whisper. But as a wave. First, it appeared on local news outlets. CEO denied her own withdrawal while undercover, fires staff on the spot. Within hours, it was trending on social media under the hashtag #BankingWhileBlack. By the next morning, Danielle's face appeared on the front page of the New York Times, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. What stunned the public wasn't just the humiliation she endured, but how she responded: calm, calculated, powerful. In a hastily arranged press conference at Wellington Trust headquarters, Danielle stood behind a sleek podium with the company's newly updated slogan behind her. Fairness isn't optional. It's policy. We failed, Danielle told the gathered reporters, cameras flashing like lightning across her sharp navy suit. Not just in one branch. but as an institution. As a system. And it ends here. To her left stood board chair Jonathan Avery, silent but firm. To her right, Beth Green, the young teller who had been promoted to interim branch manager, nervous but proud. Danielle continued, "Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Wellington Equity Commitment, a $50 million initiative to reform how we train, measure, and reward inclusive behavior across our branches." Reporters murmured. That wasn't a marketing stunt. That was a declaration of war on bias, complacency, and decades of unspoken inequality within finance. Danielle outlined sweeping reforms, all promotions tied to equity performance metrics. Disaggregated customer experience data to monitor disparate treatment by race, income, and zip code. A client equity advisory board made up of real clients who had experienced discrimination firsthand. Real-time reporting tools allowing customers to rate interactions for fairness, anonymity guaranteed. And most radically, a direct contact line to Danielle's office for any serious complaints printed on every branch wall. She held up a sample poster, "Every customer deserves dignity, respect, and equal service." If that is not your experience today, call 312-555-2093. Danielle Monroe, CEO. The press conference made national headlines. CNN called her the most fearless CEO in America. Time named her Financial Leader of the Year. A viral clip of her saying, "It shouldn't matter what I wore. It should have mattered what I brought, my history, my account, and my humanity," was viewed 22 million times in 4 days. But this wasn't just about publicity. Danielle meant every word. Within weeks, internal audits were launched at over 300 Wellington branches. Over a dozen resignations and terminations followed. Some employees left quietly. Others made noise, claiming they were being punished for harmless assumptions. Danielle didn't flinch. "This isn't a purge," she said in an all-staff video conference viewed by 12,000 employees. "It's a cleansing. And if you can't tell the difference, you shouldn't work here." Banks across the country watched and began quietly following suit. Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. All scrambled to update their own DEI policies. But Wellington led the charge. And at the center of it all was Danielle. 6 months after the LaSalle incident, she made an unannounced visit to the very same branch. This time, she didn't come undercover. She arrived in her signature blazer, not to make a scene, but to observe the changes. Beth, now officially promoted to branch manager, greeted her at the door with genuine warmth and a visibly more diverse, respectful team behind her. The lobby walls were now lined with real customer feedback displays, equity scores updated weekly, and a welcome sign that read, "We see you. We serve you. We respect you." Danielle stood quietly for a moment, taking it all in. This time, no one questioned her right to be there. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence was enough. The legacy was already underway. As she turned to leave, Beth followed her to the door and whispered, "Thank you for seeing something in me even when I didn't." Danielle smiled. "That's leadership, Beth. Seeing what's possible even when others only see limits." Outside, the wind whipped through the city canyons of downtown Chicago, but inside Danielle Monroe's heart, something settled. Not vengeance. Not victory. But vindication. She hadn't just made them see her. She had made them see themselves. And now they couldn't unsee it. What happened to Danielle Monroe was not a misunderstanding. It was a mirror held up to a system that still quietly decides who deserves dignity based on race, clothing, or perceived status. And here's the truth, the system doesn't fix itself. People do. Danielle didn't yell. She didn't beg. She didn't perform respectability politics. She stood firm, calm, and in full command of her identity. And in doing so, she exposed everything that needed to be seen, not just at a single branch, but across an entire institution. That is the real power of leadership. That is how change begins. This story is not just about banking. It's about everywhere judgment is passed before a name is spoken. It's about the offices where voices are ignored until proven credible. It's about the retail counters, the airports, the classrooms where appearance is treated as evidence. The lesson is simple, but it demands action. Treat people with respect not because they've earned it but because they're human. Because respect isn't a reward. It's a right. For companies, this isn't just a moral imperative. It's a business strategy. Inclusive institutions outperform. Equitable leadership builds loyalty. Fairness isn't charity, it's long-term profit. And for those watching, for those who've stayed silent when they knew better, or looked away when someone was being profiled, now is the time to shift. Don't wait for the next Danielle Monroe to walk through the door. Be the reason she never has to prove herself again. If you believe dignity should be standard. If you believe fairness should not be conditional. If you believe silence is no longer an option. Then speak. Share. Act. Tell your story. Demand more. And never again let prejudice pass as protocol. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain but confront. Comment with your truth. And share this message with someone who still thinks justice is optional. Because the next chapter doesn't write itself. We do.